Welcome to Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. I'm your host, Kim Todd. On Digging Deeper, we have in-depth discussions with extension experts and industry professionals about important landscape topics. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on bargains at the Garden Center. Thank you for joining us once again for Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. There's always a huge swell of gardeners at the nursery at the beginning of planting season, but right around this time of year, you might be able to find quite a bit on sale when you visit the garden centers. What is a good deal and what should you avoid? So here to discuss this topic with us tonight is our own Jeff Culbertson from UNL Landscape Services, and of course, panelist.
Yes.
Who went off and bought some things, as did I.
Sure, right.
So let's sort of start with annuals and move into perennials and trees and shrubs,
Okay.
Jeff. And they're kind of looking sad right now. I know we've had a lot of people that have had some really interesting rot spots, rabbits, weird weather that has damaged their annuals.
Right.
So this is kind of what's left. What should people be looking for?
You know, when I think about going to the nursery and looking for plants, you know, it's kind of my first impressions. So you think about that. So the first thing when I'm looking at it, and even when I look at these, I think, okay, they're the color I expect them to be. They're turgid, so they're full of water. They look like they've been cared for. I'm not seeing a lot of disease or dead leaves. Some of the things I've seen here recently at some of the nurseries, because we've had some heat.
Right.
So if they missed a watering day, all of a sudden you can see all that new growth is kind of curled over and is brown. So you can see that maybe there's been some inconsistent care at that, which happens sometimes. You know, when we have all of a sudden a 90-degree day and no one was anticipating it, you know, things dry out fast.
Or even from morning to evening.
Yeah, right.
With the wind.
Right. So that's the first thing I look for, is to make sure that it looks the way I expect it to look. It's the size I expect it to be for what I'm buying, and that I'm not seeing anything unusual at first.
All right, so rots and spots or insect damage or those kinds of things for people who don't know. I mean, on this coleus as an example, is there anything that would make you pause?
You know, I'm not really seeing anything.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any, there's some torn leaves, but that's to be expected, I think, especially if it's been windy and that sort of thing. So I'm not seeing anything here that really that is concerning me at this point.
How about the root system on these?
Yeah, why don't we take one out and just kind of look at it. So that's something to look at too. When we have the root systems, we want to look to make sure that we have some new roots, some white roots, but if we have so much that it's going out the bottom of the pot, that's a concern. Okay. So then I'm thinking this probably has been in this pot too long. So whether it's an annual like this or a shrub or a tree that has roots pouring out the bottom of the plant, out of the bottom of the pot, that's a concern.
Okay.
But these look pretty good, and you know, there's some soil here, so I can make a mess pretty easily. So it's not that it's so heavily rooted that there's really little left of the soil, that it's just solid roots. So these really don't look too bad to me, really, quite honestly.
Okay, and they're a little stretched, but
yeah, they're a little leggy, and part of that could be the fact that been in these 6-packs for a while.
Yeah.
And that's something you'll see. With plants that have been sitting in a nursery row, is that they tend to be going up because they can't really go out.
Sure.
And for a nursery, you know, to make it economical to water things, you're going to want things packed together as best you can. Otherwise, you're stretching hoses everywhere. There's a lot of labor involved. So they're going to be looking at ways to try to maximize their economies as well. So.
Perfect. All right, so there's the coleus. How about the parsley and the little chrysanthemum? I mean, they're in bigger pots to start with.
Yeah, they are. You know, this, the one thing with this parsley, I mean, it looks healthy, certainly.
Right.
And it's a plant that should be, 8 to 10 inches tall ultimately. Right. So it's a smaller parsley anyway. So this is probably what we would expect of this plant at this stage. But you can see we have some roots coming out the bottom, which isn't necessarily a big concern, but you can see we've got a lot more rooting here. So this has been in here probably, you know, it may still be fine. And especially if it's like you say on the bargain table, I'm probably grabbing this one.
Would you slice and dice, or what would you do?
I would tease it a little bit, and with the parsley you can get away with a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But I think it's one thing to buy 1 or 2 plants that you might have to do a little bit of that root cutting to, but if you're re-landscaping your front lawn and you have to do a lot of that, then I'm concerned you're going to lose a lot of plants going into summer.
Right. Okay, especially
So-
if we really are into this hot and
Yeah,
dry and windy,
right.
which it looks like we're into at least for a while here.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So
So-
you would expect most herbs probably at this time to be about like that.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, they've been in there all spring, and
Right.
so you would expect a lot of roots. And, you know, if it didn't, if it was a lot of brown roots, so that's telling me that maybe it's dried out, and we've
Yeah.
had some death to the root system, and maybe this plant isn't quite as healthy as I'd want it to be.
Okay.
So-
So how about the chrysanthemum? Because of course they're supposed to be flowering in the fall,
Right, yeah.
and a
Yeah.
bigger pot.
It is a bigger pot, and so it's interesting that it's kind of forcing that. That could be a sign of stress. I tend to flower more often when I'm stressed.
Very, very frantically flower, right?
Right, yeah. Force a bloom out of one of my ears. But, and again, we're seeing more roots here. So this has been in here for a while. So anyway.
It looks like maybe it's been pinched.
Yeah, I wonder if you're right. If it got a little leggy and because,
Yeah.
well, and I think you're right, we're seeing a lot of new growth right here.
Right.
So that is probably true that they came in and did some work on it just to kind of get it down, or
Right.
if it, you know, we had some cold weather in May, so
Right.
maybe if it got a little nipped by some frost, if we had a cold day and they did that.
Okay.
So-
All right. Okay, so then our last annual is our poor leggy tomato there, because we are having so many questions from people who have, whether it was curly top or herbicide drift or blight already. So this is kind of what's available right now, at least in some locations. What do you
Right.
think here?
Yeah, you know, and you can see that, again, we have a heavily rooted plant. The fact that it's lost all these leaves tells me that it either was, again, packed so that there wasn't any light for lower leaves. So that's
Right.
one thing that's telling me that. I'd kind of probably pass on this one, quite honestly.
Yeah.
I'm probably like you. I go after and try to salvage plants all the time, and you know, half the time I have good success, so it's all right. But
Right.
I think for this particular one, especially for tomato, I think I'd probably pass.
Right. It's getting right on the edge of being pretty late to replant tomatoes anyway, unless
Right.
you have early ones. And if they look like this, yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree.
Okay.
So, and it's probably one that has had intermittent watering, and that's probably another kind of sign. I mean, I look at some of these leaves here and some of this, and I wonder if it just hasn't had, maybe, you know, it hasn't been under some sort of drip system or mist system where it's getting
Right.
all that. So,
Okay, let's look at an interesting perennial that it's got a great name. Sandy claws.
Sandy claws, boy, isn't this cool? And you said this is an epimedium, so it's a
Right.
barren wort. So,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Do we look basically for the same thing with perennials, or what are we looking for? Because they're usually bigger. I mean, it's really hard to find a perennial that's in a small container.
Yeah, you're right. Especially this time of year.
Yeah.
A lot of those have probably been passed over at this stage.
Yeah.
But you know, actually, this is pretty good. The soil, you know, it's still fairly loose here. We've got some good root system going here. So, to me, and this is probably one I'm not going to tease too much this time of year. If I'm going to plant this, I'm going to plant it as is. Make sure I do some good soil work in
Right.
preparation for it.
Right. Okay.
But I think this looks pretty good.
Okay,
It's
so-
an unusual plant, isn't it? It's really.
It'll be interesting to see what it does. We don't have any of these, to my knowledge, on campus,
No.
and it's a shade plant, so it's going to go into our Keim courtyard, and
Okay.
we'll see what it does. And we may go grab some more and see if we can get them to live through the whatever
Yeah.
whatever we have for winter this
Yeah,
year.
if you plant this with Mahonia and sawtooth oak and chestnut, you'd have like the pointy
The
teeth-
pointy plant
yeah,
place.
pointy leaf collection.
All right, so let's look at a shrub next. And
You have
I
this-
didn't drag in a tree because that would have been a little over the top to
Right.
bring in.
But you know, a lot of the things we're talking, well, everything we're talking about
Right.
applies to especially
Right.
a potted tree this time of year.
Right.
So if you're looking at getting a potted tree, this is the very same thing we're looking at. We want to make
Right.
sure the leaves look good.
Right.
So a tree would be one in particular. You might see that margin scorch on the, you know, from the fluctuating temperatures we've had. That's something that you might see, or wind damage.
Or that we're seeing some flagging, I think, which again
Sure.
is probably either inconsistent watering or wind or the combination.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just kind of getting banged around in the nursery a little bit, which
Right.
happens.
Tipping over.
Yeah.
Because I know it's really hard unless every single tree is staked down to be able to keep
Right.
them from tipping over in the parking lot if it happens to be one of the box stores
Right.
or at a garden center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think those are all the same things, and we're taking these things out of the containers,
Yeah.
which I would think any nursery would not have heartburn if you did it. I don't think they're going to want you to tease the roots out of it
Right.
or anything. But if you want to lift it out and take a look at it, I would think any of the nurseries would understand that. A tree would be
Right.
a little more difficult, and that's where I would ask for someone at the nursery to give me a hand
Pull it out.
and make sure we do it in such a way we don't damage the tree.
Right.
So this is really, really rooted, which, it's a willow. I don't know if I'm shocked by that.
They grow like willow weeds.
Yeah, and so this
Yeah.
is one, like you're saying, that should be,
Right.
should be planted or potted up into a bigger pot, pretty rapidly,
Right. Right.
But this has a lot of roots. I'm not seeing a lot of new roots on this particular one.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and you mentioned on some of the other plants, you start with the top.
right.
This one did not look like this quite a week ago when it was purchased, but it has started to do this.
Yeah, so we're getting cankers,
Right.
which, again, with willows and dogwoods are not, unusual to see that.
Right.
Although you wouldn't expect to see it in a plant this young necessarily.
Right. So if this was a bargain plant, or even not a bargain this time of year, what would you suggest to somebody who was thinking they were going to purchase this?
Yeah, I think we would pass on this. I mean, you're going to end up removing a lot out of this. We don't know how far this is going to continue.
Right.
And certainly with some of the cankers, getting this in the ground and on consistent
Right.
watering and mulch, it may grow out of it.
Right.
Certainly.
Right.
But
Right.
there's a lot you would end up taking this. This is not going to look the same
Right.
once I get done pruning it anyway.
Point out where you would prune, just in case people don't really know what the canker looks like here.
So you can see the discoloring, and so
Right.
you're going to want to go below that. And in this case, we're going to go to a union here, a branch union. So we're going to end up taking quite a bit out of this.
The whole center,
Yeah,
really.
the whole center out of it.
Yeah.
And then, we start looking at some of these and we're bringing these down. And even though we see
Right.
some live leaves, we're going to go below the kind of the discoloration of the bark.
Right.
So again, we're going to end up with something that's probably like 8 inches tall by the time I get done.
Okay.
Because I have really sharp pruners, so
Right.
I can make a mess fast. So
Exactly. All right. Well, we want to make sure that you watch us on Facebook, 8 o'clock, right after Backyard Farmer, and all of our great social media contacts. And we want you to give us your opinions and talk about, ask questions. Tell us what you like about Digging Deeper, because we really set Digging Deeper up to be able to have a longer conversation about something that we think is important to you. We want your feedback on it. It's really a lot of fun, and we really always appreciate our Digging Deeper guests, even if they're somebody we're kind of used to.
sorry. Should have got a shorter haircut, and then you wouldn't recognize me.
Or left it long.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
So I think we have one more that, again, this was maybe not a bargain, but it's been in there a while, and people are interested in vines, or maybe this could have been a shrub in a 1 gallon or a number 1 container, kind of like that perennial was. Look for the same things, or what
Yeah,
do we really
so
do
this
here?
is a hydrangea vine, which is a great vine.
Right.
Love it.
Right.
And so, again, we talked about the first impressions.
Right.
Leaves look good. I'm not seeing any problems. There's no
Right.
dieback. There's no leaf curl. So really, from the top of it, it looks pretty doggone good right now, I think.
Beautiful green in the
Yeah,
foliage.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So it looks very healthy.
Right.
Taking it out, it's a mass of roots. Now we do see probably why we're seeing the green leaves, lots of new roots.
Right. Yeah.
So that would tell me that this particular plant probably has been well cared for, even though it should have been potted up. And they could have sold it as a 2 gallon or a 3 gallon at this
Right.
stage and got another $30.
Right.
It's been probably evenly cared for as far as being watered and fertilized and that sort of thing. So the care's probably been pretty good with it. It's just it is a real mass of roots, which in this particular plant may be a little bit of a concern. because again, with the hydrangea, they're a bit sensitive, and so I'm not going to want to really tease this particular one out like I would a spirea or dogwood or something like that that I know is pretty tough and can handle me making some cuts on the roots.
Right.
So I'll do some teasing with this, but I'm not going to get overly carried away, which means I'm going to want to watch this plant going into winter. Maybe almost treat it like a little bit of an evergreen where I'm giving it some extra water and care through the winter months to make sure that this root ball doesn't dry out, because the roots probably are going to be a lot bigger than what we have right now. They're not going to extend
into the surrounding
soil. It might take
a
year or two for it to really take off.
Right. That's a really good point, because and again, I think with a lot of our container trees and shrubs, if they really have, if they're a little sensitive or they have that kind of a root system, people tend to think you water this big area and that's fine, but that's a lot of roots. That might not get much moisture in it.
Yeah, and in the summertime, these areas, because of this lighter mix, tend to dry out much faster too.
Right, that's true.
So even though you think, well, we had a half an inch of rain on Monday, and here it is Thursday, it should be fine. Well, this is actually dried up because of all the leaves sucking all the moisture out.
Right.
And we've had that on campus where we've had some new containerized plantings. We thought we were pretty good. And all of a sudden you come in after a really hot, dry day and everything is wilted down.
Right, yeah.
And you think, well, grass is wet.
Right.
What's going on? And it's just the water isn't getting to that small root zone.
Right. Okay, so do you want to give us a couple minutes worth of summary of start at the top, work to the bottom on pretty much every plant?
Yeah, I think with any plant that we're looking at, from our little annuals to our 2-inch caliber potted tree, you start at the top and kind of look and see what your first impression is. Or is it something that has had some dieback, or is it something that's going to require a lot of pruning? So we didn't really talk about these, but I guess with the pussy willow, something that I'm really going to, this isn't going to be the same plant once I get it home, because there's just so much going on here.
Right.
And that's kind of whether that's in the spring or in the fall or right now, just seeing how much pruning it's going to need when you get it home and if it's going to look the same way.
Right.
I want to make sure the leaves look the way I expect it to look. And if you're not that familiar with it, there's so many ways, including our website, to look and kind of verify that what you're buying looks the way it should look.
Right.
And that there isn't something going on with that.
Right.
And then again, either you taking it out and carefully looking at the root system, or asking someone in the nursery to give you a hand and just to do a quick inspection of the root system.
Looking for white.
Yeah, looking for some new roots.
Yeah.
And you don't need to have extensive new roots, but just knowing that there's some good roots growing.
Right.
And I guess last but not least, if you can't get it out of the pot because there's so many roots sticking out the bottom, then that's probably another reason to think, well, maybe I'll pass on that one.
Yeah. We call it root pizza. You have to, here it is in a big pile.
Yeah,
exactly. And we didn't really talk much about in flower, but not the one that's in the most flower isn't necessarily the one you want this time of year. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement, but the one plant we didn't talk about that I brought, this butterfly bush here, they're in flower right now. So I would kind of expect it to have some flowers at this stage. So if you have a plant that has, you would expect it to be flowering now, like some coreopsis or something, I'd expect some flowers on it. Maybe not in full flower, but some flowers. If it doesn't have any flowers, then that maybe would be something I might be worried something else is going on.
Right. Well, and again, your butterfly bush, it's supposed to be in flower right now.
Yeah, right. And so it has lots of new ones coming on and a few older ones. So that's kind of, I should expect that.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And you're going to also, regardless of where you purchase it, if you're buying something that is a proven winners, you're going to pay a little bit more for the breeding that went into it. So that's just one thing for people to really think about as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, excellent, Jeff. This is great. We love to have you on, of course, and you're knowledgeable about so many things. We put you in different chairs on Backyard Farmer, and then, of course, you come and do this.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure. I like spending time with you, so.
Of course. You really like to talk plants. Let's just be realistic about that. That is all the time we have for Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. And of course, we do say thanks to Jeff to coming a little early and getting everything all dirty for our NET crew. We will be back next week with another discussion about gardening topics that matter to you. Do be sure to watch Backyard Farmer live every Thursday at 7 p.m. Central on NET. Everybody have a great 4th, and thanks for digging deeper with Backyard Farmer.